First, I just want to say that I'm happy to be here tonight. It's my first time to Rowan University. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to get into a talk about Garveyism. I'm going to share with you what I think are probably some of the most salient aspects of the Honorable Marcus Garvey and his movement. Myself, I'm a Garveyite. I no longer represent the U.N.I.A. I'm in the process of starting my own movement right now. Okay, but I am a Garveyite. Dr. Julius Garvey, the younger of the two sons of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who's actually a surgeon up in New York, is a personal hero of mine. I've had the opportunity to meet the Honorable Marcus Garvey Jr., who was actually the 7th President General, 6th successor to his father as leader in the U.N.I.A. And in my 8 years as a member of the U.N.I.A., I've learned so much, being able to sit down with Garveyites, people who were there back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, to really learn about what Garveyism is, I think really helped to change my life. I was born and raised in North Philadelphia, where I still live. I'm a father of one daughter, beautiful little girl who I love to death, 3.5 years old. Professionally, I'm a school psychologist. I'm working on my doctorate degree in clinical psychology now at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. As a school psychologist, I have two responsibilities. The first one is psychological counseling, which includes suicide prevention, unfortunately, homicide counseling, after a black man with no self-respect kills another black man. And then my other responsibility involves psychological evaluations. It is the school psychologist who's responsible for deciding who has educational disabilities. Any kid who ever goes into special education in America only got there because a school psychologist diagnosed them as having a specific learning disability or an emotional disturbance or a traumatic brain injury or as being mentally retarded or autistic, okay? And we also diagnose mentally gifted kids who are children who have IQs of at least 130 or greater. Okay, so that's what I do. And needless to say, the job is tough because being a black school psychologist, you often find yourself being a child advocate. That is trying to keep black children out of special education who don't belong there. Because when you study the history of public education in America, you'll find, okay, that the rise of special education is highly correlated with the advent of the Brown versus Board of Education decision that said that school desegregation was no longer legal. So educational racists had to come up with a new excuse and strategy by which they can continue to separate black kids from white ones. So they came up with special ed, and they came up with specific learning disability. So now scientifically and educationally, you can still separate black kids from white ones, but instead of saying you're doing it because they're black, you can now say that they have a learning disability. It's called scientific racism. You come up with pseudo-scientific reasons for why you still treat black people as the way you do. So enough of that, because tonight's topic is Garveyism, something that I love to talk about. I'm former Minister of Education for the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and I'm also the former First Vice President of the Philadelphia Division of that movement. When you talk about this man, there's so much that you need to deal with, because his career meant so much to so many people. When you look at the Nation of Islam, or when you look at Malcolm X, or when you see Kwame Nkrumah, okay, when you hear the name Nnamdi Azikiwe or Jomo Kenyatta, all these, the founders of all these movements and all these men were influenced by the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Malcolm's parents, Earl and Louise Little. Earl Little was an organizer for the U.N.I.A. in Omaha, Nebraska. His mother, Louise Little, was actually a secretary of the U.N.I.A. for one of the local branches. And she actually used to send articles to the Negro World newspaper, okay, about what was going on with black people in Nebraska. And we'll talk about the Negro World paper, which was started in 1918 by the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And I want you to try to remember that name, U.N.I.A., because you always hear Marcus Garvey, but nobody never knows the name of the movement that he started. And it's UNIA-ACL, Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League. Is actually 7 letters in the aphorism for the name of the organization. Most people call it the Marcus Garvey movement, which is true informally, okay, but formally it's the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Okay? And it was the Universal Negro Improvement Association that Malcolm's parents worked for. Malcolm, okay, even in the past used to talk about how he could remember going to meetings, because his father was the head of the division of the U.N.I.A, a staunch Garveyite. In fact, Malcolm's father was killed because of the work that he was doing in relation to supporting the Honorable Marcus Garvey. As you know, some racists caught up to him and told him to stop that Garvey preaching. If you ever seen the Malcolm movie, okay, even though there was a lot of distortions in the movie, they didn't deal a lot. Spike Lee didn't deal a lot with the roots, the Garveyite roots of Malcolm, but nonetheless, okay, there's someone in there, one of the racists, who says, stop that Garvey preaching. And Malcolm's father, who was a man with impeccable race pride, refused to stop that Garvey preaching. So one day they found him, his wife told him not to go out, he went out anyway, okay, and they beat the brother up, dragged him out to the trolley tracks, they ran over his body, but the town was so racist that they couldn't even call it a homicide, they called it a suicide. So Malcolm's father hit himself in the back of the head and drove himself to the trolley tracks, okay, and then let the trolley run over him. Okay, and that set off a spiral in Malcolm's family. It caused a lot of trouble. Okay, that was one of the reasons why Malcolm went off and did some of the deviant things he did. But once he connected with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he wound up coming right back to Garveyism. Why? Because Elijah Poole, who became the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was a member of the U.N.I.A in Detroit and Chicago. And he was a corporal in the Universal African Legion, which was the military arm of the U.N.I.A. In fact, a very good book to read is Marcus Garvey's Foot Soldiers of the U.N.I.A. And in here there's an interview with a brother named Charles Zamke, who was one of the organizers of the Detroit division of the U.N.I.A. And he talks about Elijah Poole's membership in the U.N.I.A. because he knew him personally, because he recruited him into the U.N.I.A. and was friends of his until he went on to organize the Nation of Islam after Garvey's deportation. Okay, and it's very important to understand, because we often know those who are influenced by the man, but we don't know much about the man. We know about Kwame Nkrumah, who came to Philadelphia and studied at Lincoln University, and then he went to the University of Pennsylvania for his graduate training. But nobody knows that he was a member of the Philadelphia division of the U.N.I.A. And that's why when you look at Ghana's flag today, there's a black star on Ghana's flag to pay respect for his ideological father, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who started the Black Star Line Steamship Corporation in 1919, okay, to promote commerce and trade for black people all around the world. He was a Garveyite. Okay? The African National Congress of Nelson Mandela's group, many of the original founders of the ANC was staunch Garveyites. And that's why two of the colors in their flag is the red and the green. Because there was Garveyites in South Africa who said, hey, Garvey got the program, you're going to have a flag, you got to at least have some of those colors in it. And there was a split in the ANC between the Garveyites and those who were more socialist-minded in their thinking. Now, Garvey's life as a child, his father was a stonemason, okay, a very skilled tradesman, okay? He was a very serious man who used to read all the time. Garvey himself was very intelligent as a child. He actually dropped out of school at the age of 14, and 2 years later he relocated to Kingston, Jamaica. He was actually born in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica, but the action was in Kingston. So Marcus Garvey, the young Marcus Garvey, moved to Kingston where the action was, and he actually became the youngest foreman, okay, in Kingston. Foreman of what? He was a printer. And he became a master printer as a teenager, very quickly in his life. And one thing you'll notice about Garvey when you study him, wherever Garvey went, he was involved in three things. Wherever he went, whether it was America, Jamaica, England, whether he was in Panama, no matter where he went, three things: study, struggle, and the dissemination of information. He never did one, he did all three. He studied, because he knew information was key. He struggled because he knew it was more about reading books and learning about who you are. Now you got to go out into the world and try to make a difference for your race. And then lastly, the dissemination of information. Now, a lot of people think that Marcus Garvey's nationalistic influence came when he went to England in 1912 and met Deuce Muhammad Ali. Now, Deuce Muhammad Ali was a Pan-Africanist of Egyptian Sudanese origin, and he was actually editor of the most powerful Pan-African journal of that time, and it was called the African Times and Orient Review. It was the most powerful Pan-African paper out. Garvey went in 1912 went to England, where his sister Indiana was living, and he started writing and working for Deuce Muhammad Ali. So a lot of people say, well, Garvey got his nationalism from Deuce Muhammad Ali. Yes and no. Why? Because in 1909, when he was still in Jamaica, he joined the what? The National Club in Jamaica. And he helped to edit the National Club's paper, which was called Our Own. And he had a mentor, Dr. Robert Love, who was a Jamaican nationalist who helped to tutor not only the Honorable Marcus Garvey, but the other young members of the National Club. This is in 1909, before he gets to England. In fact, before he gets to England, he goes throughout the Caribbean, he travels throughout South America, and he agitated and organized black people everywhere he went. In fact, he used to edit a paper called La Nación, which means the nation, and I believe he edited that paper in Panama, I believe it was. Okay, so this is Garvey, La Nación, talking about nationhood in 1910, 1911, 1909, before he gets to England to meet Deuce Muhammad Ali. But a lot of people say, especially Islamic nationalists, and I'm a Muslim, but I'm not an Islamic nationalist, I'm a Pan-African nationalist, a Garvey guy. But a lot of Muslims will say, well, it was Deuce Muhammad Ali who taught him his nationalism. No, he didn't. And the justification that they use is to say that he was working on his paper. He let him write. He taught him. Well, guess what? There were some fathers of Pan-African nationalism who also wrote for the African Times and Orient Review. And I'll give you two fathers of Pan-African nationalism who Deuce Muhammad Ali couldn't teach anything to because they were scholars of their own right and fathers of Pan-Africanism. And that's Martin Delany and Edward Wilmot Blyden. Both of them worked for the same paper. So if you're going to say that Deuce Muhammad Ali taught Garvey nationalism, then you must also be saying that Deuce Muhammad Ali taught Martin Delany and Edward Wilmot Blyden nationalism. And I know that ain't the truth, because they was there in the very beginning. In fact, when you deal with Garvey, you got to deal with his predecessors, because Garvey didn't come up with a new thing. And I want to make that clear. There was nothing new in it. But he was able to do what Paul Cuffey, with Henry Highland Garnett, with Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, Alexander Crumble, Edward Wilmot Blyden, and Martin Delany could not do. And that was put a movement to the ideology. Anybody could come out and say, this is the way black people need to go. People do it every day. But to put a movement to it is something else. Now we know Paul Cuffey and Bishop Turner took Africans back to Africa. We know Martin Delany went on a famous voyage to Africa, the Niger area, where he was in talks with a king in Africa to help establish a nation there. We know that a lot of what Garvey did was done before he got there, but the level of success was never realized before. See, when you deal with this man, you're dealing with two things. Number one, he's leader of the largest black organization in world history of its kind ever. Period. 15 million Africans, every religion, every country, every language, every nationality. This man is the only one who could bring them all together and said, we are all one race. If you could sum up his ideology in two words, you know what it would be? Race first, which is the title of Tony Martin's history on the U.N.I.A. And you need to get a copy of this. Now, none of my books are for sale because I only got one of each. But this is a good book to read. Tony Martin does an excellent job. Race first. Get this. I read it all the time, along with the philosophy and opinions of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, which happens to be the book he's holding in that picture. And then you have more philosophy and opinions of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And this is only the tip of the iceberg, because we know that when the government infiltrated the U.N.I.A. after they arrested him in 1922, they seized all of the U.N.I.A.'s papers, everything, took it and locked it up. Even today, you read articles in the newspaper where people are finding stacks of Negro World newspapers. People are finding some of the old notes of the U.N.I.A. secretaries. Why? Because it was all scrambled up. When the government came in, they had to hide it all. So there would be some traces of history. But again, Garvey, being born on August 17th, 1887, and I'm August 21st, and I hope there's a connection there. But he's August 17th, 1887. So he's born at the end of the 19th century. So all of that scholarship that Alexander Crummell and Henry Highland Garnett and Martin Delany and Bishop Turner were talking about, he was able to study all of that, take it, remold it, put it out there, and give it a movement. See, Garvey was a prolific speaker. Next to my cousin Frederick Douglass, he's probably the best one we ever had. In fact, Frederick Douglass of the 19th century and the Honorable Marcus Garvey of the 20th century are considered the two greatest leaders in each of their centuries. In fact, he even named one of the first ships of the Black Star Line, he called it the SS Frederick Douglass. Now, Frederick Douglass was an integrationist. Okay? Love him to death, but he was an integrationist. But when you talk about nationalism, you have to deal with Frederick Douglass. Why? Because even though he was an integrationist, he was a man of courage and heart. And he had very strong nationalistic tendencies. Now, some of Frederick Douglass's friends were Martin Delany, Edward Blight, and Alexander Crummell. They all ran together. In fact, Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany co-edited the North Star newspaper. A lot of people don't know that, so you got an integrationist and a nationalist working on the same paper together. And even when they came up with different organizations, when Delany said, I want to establish a nation for Africans in America, back home in Africa, Douglass didn't fight him. He said, I'm not going to support it because I think you're giving Abraham Lincoln and a lot of other racists an excuse to push us all back to Africa. So I'm not going to support it, but I'm not going to fight you. In fact, some people consider Frederick Douglass a black nationalist because some of the things he would say out of his mouth. But nonetheless, getting back to Garvey, his motivation to become a race leader came after he read Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. That was key. When he left to come back to Jamaica around that time, he read Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, which was all about one of Garvey's strongest concepts, and that's what? African self-reliance. Do it for yourself and by yourself. And all of this is embodied in the two words, race first. Somebody asks you, give me two words about Garvey. Give them race first. Not religion first, not class first, not color first, not language first, not nationality first, not social class first, not fraternity first. But race first. And that's no knock on the fraternities because a lot of them was Garveyites. Okay? But you got to look out for the fact that you black more so than anything else. Garvey said wherever the black man is, whether it's Africa or America or South America or Europe or Asia, you are on the bottom. I just came back from Africa. Ethiopia, South Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, we're on the bottom. Even in countries where we are the dominant population. But you got some black folks who say, well, that's because you disobeyed God. Oh, really? So does that mean the people in charge obeyed God and they was blessed so much that they've been ruling the world? Garvey said no. They rule the world because they believe, as God taught them in the Bible, that there is no master for them on earth. That the only person they bow to is God. And if God is your master, there is no way you can allow another race to keep you down. Garvey said that black people mock God when they say they can't rise out their condition. Okay? You're making God a liar, although you got the Bible and the Quran in your hand. Because in the Bible and in the Quran, it says that God gave man dominion over all things on earth. You are your own sovereign master, no other man, and no race is greater than no other race. So if that is the case, Garvey said, why can't you get up and do for yourself what the Arab did for himself, or what the Asian did for themselves, or what the European did for themselves? Race pride was the epitome of Garvey. And he had some very strong influences in the area of race pride. Remember, most of the fathers of black history were friends of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Carter G. Woodson, Arthur Schomburg, J.A. Rogers. All these men wrote for the Negro World newspaper, all of them. So they doing research, and Garvey is privy to this research as soon as they get it. These was all friends. So here you have a leader who has the privilege or the honor or intellectuals of the world. What makes the Garvey movement so special? Because Marcus Garvey proved to everybody, black and white, that yes, you can organize black people. More than anything else, he proved it. They said you can't organize black people, and then you think you're going to do it without no white money? W.E.B. Du Bois looked at him like he was crazy. In fact, one of the first people Garvey visited when he came to America was W.E.B. Du Bois, because he respected the man. Now, when he came to America, and he arrived March 23rd, 1916, he came temporarily. He was supposed to be going back to Jamaica. He came to meet Booker T. Washington, but Booker T. had died before he got here. His plan was to go on a speaking tour to raise money for an industrial school that would be built in Jamaica that would be a carbon copy of Tuskegee Institute. But when he got here, Booker T. was dead. He started the first United States division of the U.N.I.A. in New York City, and he was asked by members of that division to stay as president. See, in Jamaica, Garvey didn't initially succeed, because in Jamaica, you have a class system that's even more rigid than what we have here in America. See, in America, you either one of two things. You black or you white. But in Jamaica, you got quadroons who are quarter white, and octoroons who 1/8 white. So they got a whole, it's like 12 different cliques you could be in. So when he came in and said race first, all the black people who was used to getting privileges said, I can't be down with that, because I'm going to lose what I got. What you mean race first? I got to get down and link up with these poor black people? I'm not into that. My great-great-grandfather was white, like we do here. So he wasn't too successful there. But although he wasn't extremely successful, Jamaica still had 11 divisions of the U.N.I.A. Remember, wherever black people were on the world in significant numbers, there was a U.N.I.A. In fact, Cuba was the most organized U.N.I.A. country outside of America. I think well over 40-something branches. And in America, Louisiana and Virginia led the way with the most divisions of the U.N.I.A. But you had them everywhere. Delaware, Pennsylvania, Jersey. Garvey was at one time everything in the black world. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, who went to visit the Honorable Marcus Garvey's grave in Jamaica. And some said that after Dr. King visited Garvey's grave in Jamaica, he came back more revolutionary than what he was before. Because if you remember when you study King, up until a point, there was a lot of integration going on. Then towards the end of his days, when the government assassinated him, he started sounding more like Malcolm, more like Garvey. And a lot of King's followers said that happened after he came back from Jamaica. Now, I'm not trying to automatically say that there was a spiritual connection there, but I can say after having come back from Shaka Zulu's grave and Haile Selassie's grave, you get something when you go. But King said that Garvey was the first black man to awaken the Negro to serious race consciousness on a global scale. Malcolm said that whenever you see another black nation being born in this world, Marcus Garvey is alive. Kwame Nkrumah said that when he read this book, Philosophy and Opinions, this book, more than any other book, influenced him to become a race leader in Ghana. And in 1957, Ghana got its independence after he received the training at the feet of elders in the U.N.I.A. in Philadelphia studying this book. That's what Garvey meant to so many people. But despite how great he was, he never taught, and we never believed that he was a Messiah, a prophet, a God, or nothing like that. See, a lot of people when they study Garvey, they say, oh, he was so arrogant. Well, why didn't he allow himself to be deified? There was a small movement in certain divisions in the U.N.I.A. where they wanted to make Garvey a saint. In other words, actually have his picture up as a son of God or some type of religious figure. He was against it. He said, I'm not no religious figure. I pray to God. I'm not God. Furthermore, at the U.N.I.A. conventions, he didn't say, this is my organization and I run it. He had to get reelected every year like everybody else did. There was people who ran against him in the elections. But every year, it was he who came out on top. Madam C.J. Walker, America's first black female millionaire, was good friends with the Honorable Marcus Garvey. In fact, they started an organization together outside of the U.N.I.A. that was supposed to get some serious work done for black folks. But Garvey did rebuke Madam C.J. Walker. He was not happy about the fact that she was selling straightening combs and perms. And he told her that. One thing about Garvey, anything you did to take away from our original complexion, our original pride, he got on you. Paul Robeson, when he played in Emperor Jones, I think that was the one. Garvey got on him. He said, you in this movie acting like a little silly Negro with all the smarts you got. He said, I hope after you retire you do something for your race so you can square your conscience. You didn't play them games. W.E.B. Du Bois called him a race hater. Somebody who was in love with his white skin. And you know, them two had a feud for feuds. That was like, I don't know who had a feud like that. Okay? Probably not since they knew the pockets up. But they went at it. I mean, they really, really went at it. And unfortunately, W.E.B. Du Bois couldn't understand what Garvey was at the time. Remember, W.E.B. Du Bois was an older gentleman when Garvey comes to America. Garvey's in his early 30s, late 20s. See, W.E.B. Du Bois, and I got a lot of respect for this man because he did a lot of good things. Very smart, a master, educationally and academically, but he was a bourgeois nonetheless. See, when Douglass died, Booker T. Washington became the next great leader in black America. When Booker T. died, Du Bois said, I finally got it. We didn't have Douglass, we didn't have Booker T. You know he used to clash with Booker T. Because Booker T. said, cast your buckets down where you are. Stop worrying about politics. If you get your skills together, get your trades together, you will automatically get political respect. A lot of black people said Booker T. was crazy. Was he? Because when I look at the Asians in Philadelphia, I don't see them worrying about voting. But you know what? I do see that when black people need to buy certain products, all of them have to go through them. Every other race has certain products that you have to deal with them if you want to buy it. That's the way it rolls. So that's what Booker T was saying. How can you argue for the right to vote when you don't have no economic power? So Booker T was saying, get your economic power first, then you can go for the political power. See, as I was saying earlier, America was started for rich white men with money, power, and status. So if you want power and status in America, you have to amass wealth. So that's what Booker T. Washington was saying. Let's get something that we own before we go out there petitioning for our rights. But W.E.B. Du Bois said no. W.E.B. Du Bois said, we're not going to wait. Let's go for the political agitation. So they disagreed. So when Booker T died, Du Bois said, I'm next. All of a sudden, some Jamaican, who not even an American citizen, come jumping off the boat, young boy, 29, 30, talking about I'm starting the U.N.I.A. So W.E.B. Du Bois standing up there like, wait a minute. I got a doctorate degree from Harvard. I'm one of the first blacks to graduate from Harvard. I'm co-founder of the NAACP. I've written over 50, 75 books. I wrote the Philadelphia Negro. Who are you? You never graduated from no college. You went to 2 different colleges, but you never graduated. Who are you? And he wasn't the only one. A. Philip Randolph. And all of those guys. Who is this guy? You don't even speak English. And Garvey took over. He took over. He went on a tour to raise money for the school back in Jamaica. 38 states, a whirlwind tour. And if you can see Garvey speak, and I don't know if anybody got his CD, but I'll get you one if you need it. You can make copies of it. Listen to some of his speeches. Nobody speaks like Garvey. Even today, nobody has that fast-paced, boom, 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 motivational speech. They said when he spoke, you could hear him around the corner. A lot of people said it was like Jesus speaking because everybody came to hear him. And in Harlem, you had the soapbox tradition. Everybody who wanted to run the organization got up on a soapbox, just like you saw in Malcolm's movie. And they start preaching and preaching and preaching, and at the end of the day, Garvey will have them all. Meetings packed. It was something in him. His mother named him Mosiah. That's his middle name, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, because she always thought her son would do something great. And damn if he did. Damn if he did. Now let's talk about this flag. A lot of people look at this red, black, and green. They don't know where it come from or who gave it to them. But you're going to learn tonight. In 1920, Madison Square Garden, New York City, the U.N.I.A. held the first international convention for the Negro peoples of the world. I don't think this one should be in there. I think this was made by somebody else. But anyway, they held the first international convention for the Negro peoples of the world. 25,000 black people from all over the world, jam-packed Madison Square Garden, standing room only, and there was like another 10,000 outside. They met every night in August, and they, 25,000, came up with the colors, red, black, and green, in that order and no other order, and if you see it in another order, it's wrong. They came up with red, black, and green as the flag to represent all black people all around the world. Some of them who came from Africa, and some of them who came from Asia and South America, were threatened with death, were threatened with being expelled from their country, were threatened with life imprisonment if they went to Garvey's convention in New York, and they went anyway. So when you see this, understand that people sacrificed to get here to create this. Back in the 1900s, there was a song called "Every Race Has a Flag But the Coon." You may have heard of it. They said black people ain't got no flag. Y'all slaves over here in Africa, y'all colonized over there. So Garvey said we're going to do something about that. So when people wave this today, they don't really know what they waving. They think it's some flag that they saw one of the rap groups waving. People died for this right here. We didn't have no flag. They laughed at us until this came out and everybody backed up. And that's why when the independence explosion took place in Africa in the 1950s and in the 1960s, starting with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, every African nation, every forward-minded African nation has one of these colors in its flag to pay respect to the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who never had the opportunity to step foot on African soil. He never made it there. He was banned from going to certain countries. In fact, if you were caught with the Negro World newspaper, which to this day is the most popular and the most highly circulated black newspaper ever, you were threatened with life imprisonment, and a lot of times you were killed for having a newspaper. That's how powerful Garvey was. Remember, there was no television. There was no television. Black men who worked in the Navy, seamen, would take bundles of the Negro world, tape it to their body, and then when they got to Africa, they would run off into the villages and give it to them. The children would meet some of these sellers at the dock, and they would give them the Negro world, and they would hide it under their clothes and run off into the village. And at night in Africa, black people would circle around the leader of the village, who would read the paper from front to back so the whole country would know about it. That's what Garveyism meant back then. You ain't got a black paper today that commands that much respect. But that's what you had when Garvey was there. So when we say Garveyism, we're not just talking about him. We're talking about the men and women who stood shoulder to shoulder with him, 15 million strong, and said, black people, you are somebody. And that's why it bothers me when I hear people talk about, well, they was the first ones to talk about black pride, or he was the first one to talk about self-reliance. Hell no! They got it from Garvey, every last one of them. Before him, there was nothing else. Douglass was dead, Booker T was dead, W.E.B. Du Bois was pushing integration. But then he woke up. If you study his history, he wrote a letter to Garvey's widow, Queen Mother Amy Jakes Garvey, his second wife, apologizing for what he helped do to her husband. He was an old man then, but this great old scholar didn't have enough sense to know that this little young boy, 30-year-old from Jamaica, knew what he was talking about. And ultimately, W.E.B. Du Bois did what? Renounced his American citizenship, moved to Ghana, and died there. But not before he reconciled with his wife. Amy Jakes Garvey, his first wife. Amy Ashwood Garvey, his first wife. Amy Jakes Garvey, his second wife. Both of them were powerful Pan-African nationalists in their own right. Those sisters were strong. In fact, Amy Ashwood co-chaired the 1945 Pan-African Conference, which was considered by Dr. John Henry Clark, our last great Pan-African nationalist who's now dead, to be considered the greatest one that there was. In 1945, you had Amy Ashwood Garvey, Nnamdi Azikiwe, W.E.B. Du Bois, Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré. That 1945 conference is considered by many people the point in time when Garveyism was reawakened. See, Pan-Africanism, and y'all need to study this, was an American phenomenon. That didn't start in Africa. It started with Blyden and Delaney and Crummell and Cuffey saying all of us, no matter where we are on the planet, belong to one race. In fact, Prince Hall and Early Mason was one of the first Africans in this country to actually get involved in any type of Pan-African activity. He actually petitioned the Massachusetts Assembly to send certain Africans back home. Okay? Good point to note it. So you got to study that. So we took Pan-Africanism to Africa. They already had African nationalism. But the Pan-African of America met the African nationalists in 1945 and gave us Pan-African nationalism. I would say it was there all the time because that's what Garveyism is, Pan-African nationalism. Now, when you talk about back to Africa, people are so quick to say that Garvey's movement could be summed up in taking everybody back home to Africa. That is a lie. He never called the movement back to Africa. That's something that W.E.B. Du Bois and the communists who couldn't steal Garvey's members came up with. Garvey never advocated a wholesale immigration of black people back home. What he said was, those of you who have something to offer to the redevelopment of Africa, then you have to go back. That's what he said. He didn't say send the drug dealers and all the baby mamas back there. He never said that. Only those who can build some help. See, what he knew, which is something we still don't know now, whether you live in Africa or not, you have a responsibility to her. And Africa has a responsibility to you. See, in America, even in the post-911 era, Arab people in this country are never harmed. Rarely. You know why? Because they have great nations on the other side of the world who can stand up for their behalf if they're mistreated here. Asians are not mistreated because they have great nations on the other side of the world who can stand up for them. But you, black people, wherever you are on the planet Earth, you don't have one single powerful nation who can stand up and protect you. So when we talk about African redemption as Garveyites, we're not saying everybody go home. We saying send your money back home so they can build up. So when you get in trouble over here, somebody can do something about it. See, you cannot rise no higher than your race. A lot of us think we are individuals. The world isn't made up of individuals. It's made up of racial groups. A white person who's homeless and a bum will still get more respect than a black person with a doctorate. Why? Because they belong to a race of people that commands that respect. A black person with a doctorate and 50 million degrees and $1 million in the bank will never give us so much respect because you can never climb higher to the race to which you belong. The race will always supersede you in status. You have your individual status and reputation, and then you have that racial status and reputation. And you take that everywhere you go. So as long as black people stay on the bottom, you stay on the bottom. Oprah Winfrey found that out when she went to Europe and went to a restaurant and they wouldn't even serve her. John Street found that out when he was over in L.A. and they arrested his son and wouldn't let him go. In fact, one of the Negroes in Philadelphia found out recently when they disrespected his wife on one of the airplanes and the white people on the plane was talking about it like trash. Now these is great black people, but they getting treated like nothing, even though people knew who they were. Because you belong to that race that don't get no respect. So whatever you do, you have to, in some way, shape, or form, contribute to Africa. And then we say, well, we didn't lose nothing in Africa. You left your mind in Africa, like Malcolm said. Ain't no getting around that. The Honorable Marcus Garvey Jr., his son, in notice how that got louder after she left, but in 1992, he became President General of the U.N.I.A., his son. And what he did was he took Garveyism and he broke it down into 7 major concepts. Now, I already told you the best 2-word summary for Garveyism is race first. In fact, what Garvey said was, the most powerful defensive weapon within the reach of Negroes is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. The most powerful defensive weapon within the reach of Negroes is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. In other words, look out for your race first. When you go to black neighborhoods, you see Asians selling us garbage food. But you can't go to their neighborhood and buy and sell them none. They come to your neighborhood and sell you cars. You couldn't open up a car dealership in their neighborhood. You know why? Because they build up a cultural fence around the neighborhood. And you don't get in and get access unless you look like and belong to and ascribe to the same culture. They practice race first. Everybody practice it except us because we don't have no race pride. You got to have unity. All black people are one. I don't care if you're Muslim. I don't care if you're Christian. As the brother said, read George James' Stolen Legacy. All the religions come from you. Black people was washing their hands 3 times and washing their feet 3 times and washing their face 3 times and wearing frankincense and myrrh way before Jesus and Muhammad. That don't start with them. Pharaoh Akhenaten was teaching about the belief in one God before Jesus, Moses, and Muhammad. You got to learn your history. And one thing about Garvey, because he was friends with Carter G. Woodson and J.A. Rogers and Arthur Schomburg, he was a master of history. And he advocated the mastering of history because when you know who you are, that gives you a degree of power that nobody can ever take from you. I'm working on my doctorate degree, and I love it. When the white kids in my class start bringing up racial debates, ooh, I love it. And they go out there, well, you know we invented the airplane, and I say, yeah, but we invented the helicopter. And they say, yeah, but Albert Einstein invented the atomic bomb. And I say, hell no, with 6 black scientists working with him. You got to know this, and you got to feed it to your children so they grow up with some pride. We think we made it. Black people in 1865, when slavery ended, owned 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. Right now, today, you still only own 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. Why? Because we are all about materialistic, depreciable items. We don't know nothing about no wealth. Look at your athletes. I see half of them running up and down Philadelphia. They own sneakers. They own trucks, boats, junk like that. But ain't no land, ain't no businesses, ain't no international corporations jumping off. And that's what keeps black people under the bottom. As Garvey said, I looked up and I said, where was the black man's government? Where was his army? Where was his men of big affairs? And he said, by God, I will help them make them. And that's why he came up with the U.N.I.A, a race uplift organization. Not no integrationist organization, not no religious organization, not no communist or Marxist organization. W.E.B. Du Bois floated with communism, but at the end of the day, he realized that Garvey was white, and he admitted it. He said the young man knew what he was talking about. I was wrong. W.E.B. Du Bois was always a Pan-Africanist. You can't take that from him. In fact, he was one of the first students under Alexander Crummell, one of the fathers of Pan-African nationalism, at his Negro Academy. He had an American Negro Academy, Alexander Crummell. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of his first students. So he knew Pan-Africanism, but he didn't know Garvey Pan-Africanism. He didn't know Garvey Pan-Africanism. And even though Garvey has a lot in common with the Pan-Africanists who came before him, like Garnett and Blyden and Crummell and Delaney, there's a big difference. Most of them attached Christianity to their nationalism. Garvey didn't do that, although he was a Christian. And that had a lot to do with how successful he was. Henry Highland Garnett believed in Pan-African nationalism, but he thought that Christianity should have a strong hand in how it's ran. Garvey said, it's going to be race first. And we're not going to dictate to any black people just exactly how that's going to go in. Very, very important that we understand this. Very, very important that we understand this. Now, I don't want to lose nothing out. Let's talk about the Black Star Line real quick. I mentioned it earlier. When Marcus Garvey started the Black Star Line in 1919, that's equivalent to a black man owning an airline today. Now, if you notice, you don't own no airlines. Bob Johnson, after he sold BET to Viacom for $2 billion, set out to open his own airline. But white racism didn't allow that. They said you can go on a basketball team anyway. That's what y'all like to do. Go get that. But you ain't flying no planes because you black. See, even now in America, there's certain industries that you can't get in because you black. You'll never be allowed to trade on the stock market unless you unify. You'll never be allowed to get a shipping company like Garvey did unless you unify. And you'll never be allowed to get an airline like Garvey did unless you unify. So when Garvey said, I'm going to put ships on the water for black people, white people lost their mind. And then there was a rumor going around that once Garvey established a country in Liberia, he was going to spread out to the whole African continent until he made the whole continent nothing but Garveyites. White people got crazy. They said, we catch you with a Negro world, you're dead. I don't hear nothing about no Garveyism. In fact, every type of tragedy that every black power movement experienced, the U.N.I.A. experienced it first. Remember how they raided the Black Panther offices, shot them up, killed Panthers. They did the same thing to the U.N.I.A. In fact, there was one event called the Chattanooga riot, I think it was. There were several events where the police would storm into U.N.I.A. meetings and shoot everybody up. Haul the Garveyites off the prison. The U.N.I.A. used to have shootouts with the Ku Klux Klan. Could you imagine a black organization standing up to the Klan in 1920? But that's what they did. They lift this up and they say, to hell with that. This is our race. You're going to protect yours, we're going to protect ours. So a lot of people got mad at Garvey when he met with the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, because you know that took place. And that's when W.E.B. Du Bois and Chandler Owens, Philip Randolph said, there you go, see, he's crazy. The nigga crazy. What is he doing? Meeting with the Klan. You know why he met with the Klan? Because the Klan was going to war with the U.N.I.A. down south. Garveyites was killing Klansmen. Klansmen was killing Garveyites. So Garvey, as any leader of any race, said, let's sit down and see if we can bring an end to this. So yours can stop dying and mine can stop dying. Nations do it all the time. You make peace with your enemy to prevent death. But W.E.B. Du Bois and the rest of them didn't understand it. Furthermore, the Klan and Garvey agreed on certain things. Not racial supremacy. They never agreed on that. Let's get that straight. But you know what they did agree on? You want your race to remain pure, and so do I. You don't want no black men marrying no white women, and neither do we. As Garvey said, when he met with the Grand Wizard of the Klan, he said he was talking to a white man who was brutally a white man, and he said that white man was talking to a black man who was brutally a black man. You don't want none of our blood, and we don't want none of yours. You believe in white pride, we believe in black pride. You think you a strong and mighty race, we think we a strong and mighty race. But the black integrationists went off. W.E.B. Du Bois started talking that old bourgeois stuff. They didn't know what to do. What is he doing meeting with the Klan? Garvey said, I ain't got no problem with them. My only problem is the fact they taking the black lives, so I got to go do something about that. But outside of that, I'm cool. So then 1922 comes. He gets arrested in connection with the Black Star Line. You know what he got convicted on? They said he was engaged in fraud. They said he was selling stock in the Black Star Line when he knew he didn't own the ship and that the stock was worthless. Garvey said, we were in talks to purchase the ship, number one, and everybody knew it. And number two, our stock ain't worthless. As long as black people got faith in the U.N.I.A., then we can build and do whatever we want. But more importantly, when he asked for proof, you want to send me to jail? Where's the proof? Guess what they pulled out? An empty envelope. And they said that there was something in the envelope that they can't find that showed he was selling bad stock. Garvey said, what? And everybody else said, what? You want to send him to jail for an empty envelope owned by a black man named Benny Dancy who couldn't even remember what was inside the envelope, a man who Garvey never saw a day in his life? In fact, one of the white district attorneys, after they sentenced Garvey to prison, said, I've never seen a man get framed up like that in my life. I've never seen a man get framed up like that in my life. You sent them to jail on an empty envelope owned by a man who he never saw, who can't even remember what was in it? How can a stock be defunct in a ship line and they ain't even get a chance to get it up and running? You know why? Because Garvey was too much of a threat. Some people say the Black Star Line was a failure because ship after ship was sinking. It was running aground. But did you know that the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover planted its first full-time agent in the U.N.I.A.? And many more came after that, and one of Garvey's closest confidants was an FBI agent. And in fact, One of the men who Garvey trusted, a captain on one of the Black Star Line ships, influenced Garvey to buy a ship for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he knew the ship was worthless, but he got a 25% cut of the money, and that came out at the trial. That's what black people do to other black people. Garvey never failed, number one. Because when I look to Africa and I see 54 independent nations, ain't no failure in that. Jomo Kenyatta used to go listen to Garvey give lectures as a child. Patrice Lumumba studied Garvey strongly. Kwame Nkrumah said nothing did more for him than that book. So when I look to Africa, Garveyism is everywhere. And it is in all things. And that's what you got to understand. And when you deal with Garvey, you got to deal with a black image of God. He said if you're going to worship God, he better look like you. And some of y'all still don't understand that. I go to black churches all the time to give talks, and I still see white people on the glass windows. And it don't make no sense. And then the black preachers say, well, what difference does it matter, Garvey? I'll tell you as a psychologist why it matters. Because you have two aspects of the mind. You have the conscious mind and you have the unconscious. The conscious mind is about 10%. The unconscious is 90%. The conscious mind is the rational reasoning mind. The unconscious, what dictates your acts and your thoughts and your behaviors, is very irrational. And it makes sense based on the images that you feed it. So in other words, no matter how much I tell you that Jesus was black, and we know he was black because they got coins in Europe with his face in it, and we know that he came from the tribe of Judah, which was the blackest of all the tribes of Israel, and we know that in Africa you couldn't be Christ unless your skin was jet black. Even though you know that, it means nothing. You know why? Because all you see is white pictures. So when the unconscious is fed with those images, it automatically produces a truth that says Jesus is white no matter what you tell me. And that's why you got to get rid of the Jesus pictures. And that's why Garvey said everything in your house should look like you. And if it don't look like you, it shouldn't be in your house. And when y'all have children, if you got them now, you better do the same thing. Because most of us allow our children to be raised on television. And by the time they 5, they already hate the fact that they're black. The cartoons is white. When you bring them from the hospital, every little character in their room is white. The sheets is white. The walls is white. Everything is white. And then when they get 6 or 7 and say, Mommy, why my hair don't look like that? Or my eyes ain't that color? You trying to figure out who taught them to hate their race? You taught them. From the time that they were babies. So you know what Garvey did? In 1920, he had the Negro Factories Corporation. They had restaurants, hotels, businesses, factories. They did it all. He opened up a factory for black dolls. So no black girl in America could walk around with a doll that didn't look like her. Now, you know, up until the 1920s, every doll was white. Garvey knew what that did to the psyche of black little girls. So he made black dolls. A black doll. White people thought he was crazy. A lot of the black people thought he was crazy. Even today, you got black parents who don't let their black kids play with black dolls. Because of that inferiority complex, that slave psychology. As Frantz Fanon said, even W.E.B. Du Bois said it. Every black person got a little white devil in the inside. And until you exercise that white devil from your inside, you will never be free in your thoughts. Carter G. Woodson, Garvey's friend, said what? If you control the way a man thinks, you don't have to worry about him going to the back door. He'll find it. And if it ain't no back door, he'll make one for himself. Garvey said the opposite. If you give a black man race pride and teach him who he is, if it ain't no door for him and his race, they'll go and knock the damn door down. That's what Garveyism was about. Hitler copied Garvey. Mussolini copied Garvey. They did it with racism, but the pageantry of the U.N.I.A., nobody was able to really capture that. When they had parades, 250,000 black people in 1920 walking all through the neighborhood. They said whenever Garvey had a parade, the little kids was on top of the roof, black people hanging out the window. Here comes the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Stand up for him. That's what he meant to black people. He did what no other leader you ever had did, except Douglas. Every movement that come after him borrowed from him. Every last one. It's a carbon copy of the U.N.I.A. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm starting my own movement right now, and it's a carbon copy, but I'm proud of it. And that's the way you got to be. If you ain't dealing with race pride, if you ain't dealing with identity, identifying with the fact you black, because the fact your color is dark don't mean nothing. Because in certain parts of this world, you can be jet black and still be considered white. Because because that's the way they play games with you. You can go to Africa, certain countries you're going to go to, they'll say, I'm not an African, I'm an Englishman, because they was colonized by the English, just like you say you're an American. Now, when you walk down the street, like W.E.B said, they don't see no American, they see a Negro. African and American, you can't be both. You're either the slave or the slave master. Make up your mind. And that's what Garvey was trying to get us to see. You got to deal with race pride, and you got to deal with self-reliance. Self-reliance is, to me, the most amazing thing that he did. To bring 15 million together, to put ships on the water, to open up a doll factory, to influence every major black leader of significance without a white dollar. When you got black preachers all across America today running around looking for some faith-based money. You got any faith-based money for my church after school? Faith-based money? They use money to buy you out. And that's why Garvey said W.E.B. Du Bois will never be free, because your education, your job, everything you are was financed by white people. That's why y'all got to be independent when you get out of there. Carter G. Woodson already said the education we get in these colleges educates us against who we're supposed to be. But you got to take everything they give you, take it in, rework it, and use it for the benefit of your race. When I'm in class and they're giving me that homosexual Freud or that homosexual Carl Jung, you think I'm swallowing that? No! I want to know how I can flip it and use it to the benefit of my race. And you got to do the same thing. You can't say you're going to be a teacher, but you ain't studied the great black educators. You can't say you want to be a psychologist, and you ain't studied Franz Fanon and Cresswell and W.E.B and all of the greats. You got to do your own education after you get this at Rowan, or after I get what I get at PCOM, or you be of no use. Garvey didn't have no college degree, but he was more successful than every college degree leader you can name. The U.N.I.A had more divisions, more members, and achieved more success than every black movement after Garvey put together, including the ones you got today. And that's what Garveyism is. And that's why I'm a Garveyite. Pan-African nationalist to the bone. I'm not about no miscegenation. I'm all about not taking no money from the white folks. And one thing Garvey said, one time somebody came to Garvey and said, white people over here want to give the U.N.I.A some money. It was thousands. You know what he said? Tell them to keep their money. This is a black man's movement. Now, can you imagine a black leader today telling white people to keep their money? They're asking if they got any more. You got to do it yourself. It's hard to do it by yourself. That's why the black colleges don't stay open, because it's hard. But unless you do it by yourself, we will never get anywhere by race. It's better to have $10 that you own than $100 million that somebody else gave you. Because if they gave it to you, they can take it back. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. In closing, before I take some questions, I want to read something from Garvey real quick. Now y'all think I'm crazy. I'm going to read something from Garvey real quick. Looking for my favorite speech. Here we go. This is, and all y'all need to get y'all a copy of the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. Volume 1, 2, and Volume 3. As a matter of fact, one thing that his wife did, Queen Mother Amy Jakes Garvey, when he was arrested and in prison to raise money, she compiled the first and second volume of this book. So this book got a history to it to help raise money for the Honorable Marcus Garvey to get him out. And remember, it was this book that served as the ideological basis for the freedom of the first country in Africa, Ghana, in 57 under Kwame Nkrumah. You got to read this. Read your Bible, read your Quran, and then you read some Garvey. It's just that simple. Now let me give you this. This is the first letter he wrote from Atlanta prison. February 10th, 1925, and I love this. Fellow men of the Negro race, greetings. I'm delighted, now he's in prison in Atlanta. I'm delighted to inform you that your humble servant is as happy in suffering for you and our cause as is possible under the circumstances of being viciously outraged by a group of plotters who have connived to do their worst to humiliate you through me. In the fight for real emancipation and African redemption, I do trust that you have given no credence to the vicious lies of white and enemy newspapers and those who have spoken in reference to my surrender. The liars plotted in every way to make it appear that I was not willing to surrender to the court. My attorney advised me that no mandate would have been handed down for 10 or 14 days, as is the custom of the courts. And that would have given me time to keep my speaking engagements that I had in Detroit, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. I haven't left the city for 10 hours when the liars flashed the news that I was a fugitive. That was good news to circulate all over the world, to demoralize the millions of Negroes in America, Africa, Asia, the West Indies, and Central America. But the idiots ought to know by now that they can't fool all the Negroes at the same time. I do not want at this time to write anything that would make it difficult for you to meet the opposition of the enemy without my assistance. Suffice it to say that the history of the outrage shall form a splendid chapter in the history of Africa redeemed, when black men will no longer be under the heels of us, but have a civilization and a country of their own. The idiots, the whole affair is a disgrace, and the whole black world knows it. We shall not forget. Our day may be 50, 100, or 200 years ahead, but let us watch, work, and pray, for the civilization of injustice is bound to crumble and bring destruction down upon the heads of the unjust. The idiots thought that they could humiliate me personally, but in that they are mistaken. The minutes of suffering are counted, and when God and Africa come back and measure out retribution, these minutes may multiply by thousands for the sinners. Our Arab and European friends will be ever vigilant, as the rest of Africa and ourselves shall be. Be assured that I planted well the seed of black nationalism, which cannot be destroyed even by the foul play that has been meted out to me. Continue to pray for me, and I shall ever be true to my trust. I want you, the black people of the world, to know that W.E.B. Du Bois and that vicious Negro-hating organization known as the National Association for the Advancement of Certain People are the greatest enemies that black people have ever had in this world. I have so much to do in the few minutes at my disposal that I cannot write exhaustively on this or any other matter. But be warned against these two enemies, W.E.B. Du Bois and NAACP. Don't allow them to fool you with fine-sounding press releases, speeches, and books. They are the vipers who have planned with others the extinction of the black race. My work is just begun, and when the history of my suffering is complete, the future generations of Negroes will have in their hands the guide by which they shall know the sins of the 20th century. And I know you too, believe in time, and we shall wait patiently for 200 years if need be, to face our enemies through to posterity. You will cheer me much if you will now know to do even more for this organization now that I'm not among you. Hold up your hands of those who carry on. Help them to make good so that the work may continue to spread from pole to pole. I am also making a last-minute appeal for support to the Black Cross Trading and Navigation Company, which you started after they seized the Black Star Line. Please send in and make your loans so as to enable the directors to successfully carry on the work. All I have given you. I have sacrificed my home and my loving wife to you. I entrust her to your charge to protect and defend her in my absence. She is the bravest little woman I know. She has suffered and sacrificed with me for you. Do not desert her at this dismal hour, when she stands alone. I have left her penniless and helpless to face the world. Because I gave you all, but her courage is great, and I know she will hold up for you and for me. After my enemies are satisfied, in life or death, I shall come back to serve you even as I have served before. In life, I shall be the same. In death, I shall be a terror to the foes of Negro living. If death has power, then count on me to be the real Marcus Garvey I would like to be. If I might come in an earthquake, or a cyclone, or a plague, or a pestilence, or as God would have me, then be assured that I shall never desert you and make your enemies triumph over you. Would I not go to hell 1,000,000 times for you? Would I not, like Macbeth's ghost, walk the earth forever for you? Would I not lose the whole world in eternity for you? Would I not cry forever before God omnipotent for you? Would I not die 1,000,000 deaths for you? Why be sad? Cheer up and be assured that if it takes 1,000,000 years, the sins of our enemies shall visit the 1,000,000th generation of those that hinder and oppress us. Remember, I have sworn by you and my God to serve to the end of time. The wreck of matter and the crash of worlds. The enemies think I'm defeated. Did the Germans defeat the French in 1870? Listen to that history. Did Napoleon really conquer Europe? If so, then I'm defeated. But I tell you, the world will hear from my principles even 2,000 years from now. I am willing to wait on time for my satisfaction and the retribution of my enemies. I observe my enemies and their children and posterity, and one day you shall see retribution settling around them. If I die in Atlanta, my work has only begun. I shall live in the physical or the spiritual to see the day of Africa's glory. When I am dead, wrap the mantle of the red, black, and green around me. For in the new life I shall rise with God's grace and blessings to lead the millions up the heights of triumph with the colors that you know well. Look for me in the whirlwind or the storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace I shall come back and bring with me countless millions of black slaves who died in America and the West Indies and the millions who died in Africa to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life. The civilization of today is going drunk and crazy with its power, and by such it seeks to injustice, fraud, and lies to crush the unfortunate. But if I am apparently crushed by the system of influence and misdirected power, my cause shall rise again to plague the conscience of the corrupt. For this I am satisfied, and for you I repeat, I am glad to suffer and even die. Again I say cheer up, for better days are ahead. I shall write the history that will inspire the millions that are coming and lead the posterity of our enemies to reckon with the host for the deeds of their fathers. With God's dearest blessing, I'll leave you for a while. One love. Now that's gone. I'm going to stop there, and I'll take some questions if y'all have any. Any questions? Yes, good brother.
What happened to Marcus Garvey?
Okay, good question. The brother said, what happened to Garvey after he got deported? He was sent to prison in 25. He served for 2 years and 10 months. He was deported in 27. Now, there was some more injustice surrounded in that. In order to be deported as an illegal alien or an alien who's causing trouble, the time that you've been in the country must be less than a certain amount of time. Garvey had already been in America longer than what the law says he should have been to be deported. So he should have never even went back to Jamaica. That was a fraud. Furthermore, when President Calvin Coolidge commuted his sentence, the sentence did not include deportation. The sentence was only to let him out of prison, but nobody told him that. So soon he got out of prison, nobody said, Garvey, you don't have to go back to America. They immediately put him on the ship to go back to Jamaica, never to return again. He only came back as close as Canada. Once he got back to Jamaica, the headquarters of the U.N.I.A. was relocated in Jamaica. In 1929, the U.N.I.A. probably held its greatest convention after the 1921 convention when we got the red, black, and green flag. That was in 29. He was also elected to public office in Jamaica. But he was arrested. While he was elected, he was arrested. This is how much power he had. He was in prison doing time, but still was elected. Imagine a politician being locked up and still get elected. And he was arrested because he said that if he was elected, any judge who he found infringing upon the rights of black people, he would have them removed from the bench and put in jail themselves. So the white people said, oh no, you don't. And they put him in jail. He got out of jail. A couple years after that, he moved to England and moved the U.N.I.A. base to England. His wife and 2 sons was there, Honorable Marcus Garvey Jr., Dr. Julius Garvey. But one of the sons had an illness, and the cold weather in England wasn't too suitable for that. So Amy Jakes Garvey took him back to Jamaica. Garvey continued to do his work. He went to the League of Nations several times. Okay, that was something I didn't mention. Beginning in 1919, the U.N.I.A. consistently and repeatedly, at least a half dozen times, went to the League of Nations at that time to petition to give to the U.N.I.A. the former German colonies that they lost in World War II and let the U.N.I.A. have those lands to build up our nation. But they never accepted his request. He even was outraged at Haile Selassie. Okay, there was a little beef because at the 1920 convention, Haile Selassie was one of the only African countries who refused to send a delegate. He returned the invitation back to Garvey unopened. And also when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, Garvey had some very unkind words for Haile Selassie because he said he shouldn't have left Ethiopia, and that had he prepared the country for Mussolini, he would have never had to leave. Okay? Ultimately, 1940, he continued to preach, he continued to teach, but the organization started to break apart. Okay? All these organizations y'all know about now started claiming a lot of the members. A lot of members went off into the different groups. Nation of Islam got a lot of members. More Science Temples got a lot of members. A lot of the members we service in the Black Power movement. Okay? In Africa, most of the members helped contribute to the African independence explosion. Okay, Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, even credits the Honorable Marcus Garvey for him coming up with Black Power, even though he didn't come up with that. Garvey actually was using Black Power way before Kwame Ture was born. Okay, and a lot of other things like that, not taking nothing away from them. But basically, when Garvey left America, you had millions of people with no leader, and their leader couldn't come back. So that's where you get all these other groups come in, and they say, well, you got all these leaders, all you got to do is give them a Garvey-type program, and they'll come. And that's what they did, and that's why you got the organizations you got now. But none of them was ever able to do for black people what Garvey did. And what we need now is a new Marcus Garvey movement. Okay, I would encourage all of you, if you ever get a chance, go visit the U.N.I.A. And I need to stop.